Security kicks out man in Harris shirt, then finds out he's the owner. How will the owner respond? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The hum of activity filled the air. Shoppers moved briskly through the brightly lit corridors of the Northwest Plaza Mall, arms heavy with bags, laughter echoing off the marble floors. The mall buzzed with life, families stopping for food, teenagers laughing near storefronts, and couples browsing window displays. At the center of it all stood Harris, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, broad shoulders, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He wore a simple tan work shirt with the word Harris stitched above the pocket. His presence seemed unassuming, but his expression was thoughtful, almost calculating, as though he was taking everything in. He stood quietly near a kiosk, his gaze lingering on a flickering ceiling light and a group of employees chatting idly instead of tending to customers. His lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing, hands in his pockets. "Excuse me, sir," a voice said suddenly. Harris turned to see two mall security guards approaching. The lead guard, Officer Tate, was young, confident, and clearly eager to assert his authority. His partner, Officer Cole, trailed behind, less sure but loyal to the cause. "Yes," Harris replied evenly, his tone polite but firm. Tate stopped a few feet away, squaring his shoulders. "We've had complaints about you hanging around the mall all day. What exactly are you doing here?" Harris blinked, his brows knitting together slightly. "Complaints? I'm not bothering anyone. Just observing." "Observing?" Tate echoed with a smirk. "That sounds like loitering to me." Harris frowned. "Loitering?" He chuckled faintly, shaking his head. "That's a bit of a stretch, don't you think?" Cole shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with Tate's aggressive tone. "Sir, we just need to know what business you have here. Are you meeting someone?" "I'm not causing any trouble," Harris said simply. "There's no need for this." Tate's face hardened, clearly not liking the man's calm response. He stepped closer, his voice dropping into a warning tone. "We asked you a question. If you can't give us a good reason for being here, we'll have to escort you out." The tension thickened. Shoppers nearby began to notice, their eyes flicking toward the confrontation. Harris took a deep breath, clearly holding back frustration. "I don't think that's necessary." Tate's jaw clenched. "Sir, this is your final warning. Either you explain yourself or we'll have to ask you to leave the premises." Harris met Tate's gaze steadily, his voice firm but calm. "I'm not breaking any laws and I have every right to be here." Tate didn't like that answer. He reached for Harris's arm, gripping it tightly. "That's it. You're out of here." Harris jerked his arm free, his voice rising just slightly. "Don't touch me. You're making a mistake." Cole hesitated, glancing nervously between Tate and Harris. "Tate, maybe we should—" "No," Tate snapped. "This guy's just looking for trouble. Let's go." Before Harris could react, both guards moved to grab him. Harris resisted instinctively, pulling back as shoppers gasped and murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Let go of me," Harris said sharply, his calm demeanor starting to crack. "You don't know what you're doing." Tate ignored him, his voice booming. "Step aside, folks. This man's being removed for loitering and causing a disturbance." "Disturbance?" Harris repeated incredulously as they forced his arms behind his back. "This is ridiculous. I haven't done anything wrong." Phones were out now, cameras recording the entire ordeal. People whispered in disbelief as Harris was dragged, struggling, toward the main entrance. "Did you see that? He wasn't even doing anything. Why are they being so rough with him? Who is that guy, anyway?" Harris glanced over his shoulder, his voice filled with warning. "You're going to regret this. Trust me." But Tate only smirked, his grip tightening. "Yeah, we'll see about that." The automatic doors whooshed open, and Harris stumbled slightly as the guards pushed him outside into the hot afternoon sun. He turned sharply to face them, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're out of line," Harris said, his voice low and steady. "And you'll answer for this?" Tate crossed his arms, smirking smugly. "Not my problem, pal. Don't come back unless you want another escort out." Cole shifted uncomfortably, clearly starting to feel uneasy about the entire situation. "Maybe we should have just let him be, Tate?" Tate shot him a glare. "What's your deal?" "He was loitering. We did our job." Harris shook his head slowly, his gaze fixed on Tate. "You should pay more attention to the people around you, officer. You might learn something." Before Tate could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind them. A man in a crisp suit rushed out of the mall, his face flushed with panic. It was David Rhodes, the mall's general manager. Wait. Stop. Rhodes shouted, waving his arms frantically. Tate turned, frowning. What now? Rhodes came to a halt in front of Harris, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Mr. Harris. I am so sorry, I had no idea. Tate froze, his smirk disappearing instantly. Wait. Mr. Harris? Harris stood tall, dusting off his shirt and adjusting his sleeves. Yes, Mr. Harris, he said pointedly, his voice dripping with irony. You know, the man whose name is stitched right here. He gestured to the bold name on his chest. Rhodes turned to Tate and Cole, his face red with fury. Do you have any idea what you've just done? This man, this Harris, is the owner of Northwest Plaza Mall. The color drained from Tate's face. What? That can't be right. Harris raised an eyebrow, folding his arms across his chest. Does it look like I'm joking? Cole took a shaky step back, his mouth hanging open in shock. You're the owner? That's right, Harris said coolly, his sharp gaze locking onto Tate. And you've just made a very big mistake. Rhodes looked as though he might explode. I cannot believe this. Mr. Harris comes here often, to observe as is his right, and you treated him like a criminal? In front of dozens of customers? You've humiliated him. Tate stammered, scrambling to find his voice. I thought he was loitering. He didn't say who he was. Harris stepped forward, his calm demeanor unnerving in its intensity. And you never thought to ask, did you? You assumed. You treated me like a problem instead of a person. Is that how you handle all your customers? Tate opened his mouth to respond but found no words. He looked down, avoiding Harris's gaze. Rhodes turned to Harris, his expression mortified. Mr. Harris, I can't apologize enough for this. I'll handle it immediately. Harris held up a hand, silencing him. No need, Rhodes. I'll handle it myself. He turned back to Tate and Cole, his voice low and firm. Meet me in my office tomorrow morning. We'll have a conversation about respect, professionalism, and what it means to represent this mall. Tate swallowed hard, nodding quickly. Yes, sir. Of course. Harris didn't wait for a response. He straightened his shirt, turned on his heel and strode back into the mall. Shoppers parted to let him pass, their faces a mix of awe and curiosity. Whispers followed him. That's the owner? I can't believe they did that to him. Good for him, he handled that so well. Inside, the mall seemed to settle into an awkward silence. The security guards watched him disappear down the corridor, their earlier bravado replaced by shame. Cole glanced at Tate, his voice quiet. Told you we should have listened. Harris strode through the mall with quiet authority, his steps measured and deliberate. Whispers still rippled through the crowd as shoppers parted to let him pass, their gazes a mix of awe, curiosity, and embarrassment on behalf of the security team. The confrontation had become the event of the day, something that people would no doubt talk about for weeks. As Harris reached the central atrium, he paused. His sharp eyes scanned the bustling scene before him. The customers, the staff, the stores, before lingering on the flickering ceiling light he had noticed earlier. A small frown crossed his face, but he said nothing. Behind him, Rhodes hurried to catch up, still flustered and red-faced. Mr. Harris. Again, I can't tell you how sorry I am for this whole mess. I'll see to it that Officer Tate and his partner are dealt with appropriately, termination if necessary. Harris raised a hand to stop him, turning calmly. No, Rhodes. Rhodes blinked in surprise. Sir? Firing them won't solve the real problem, Harris replied evenly. The issue isn't just two overeager guards, it's the culture we've allowed to take root here. Rhodes swallowed nervously. I'm not sure I understand. Harris sighed softly, his expression hardening. Look around you. This mall runs because of its people, our staff, our customers, our tenants. But if those people aren't treated with respect and care, what are we left with? Empty stores. Broken trust. Rhodes nodded quickly, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. Of course, sir. You're absolutely right. Good, Harris said, his voice firm. Then let's address this properly. I want a meeting with the entire management team first thing tomorrow morning. And have Officer Tate and Cole report to my office as well. Yes, sir. I'll see to it immediately. Harris nodded, then continued walking toward the private elevators at the far end of the mall. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that made it impossible to ignore him now. Staff members straightened as he passed, store managers rushed to tidy their displays, and customers stared, murmuring among themselves. Is that really the owner? I heard he owns the entire chain of malls across the state. No wonder he was so calm. He's probably a billionaire. The following morning, the conference room at Northwest Plaza was filled with tension. The management team sat nervously at the large mahogany table, their laptops open but untouched. At the far end of the room sat Harris, his expression calm but unreadable. Officer Tate and Officer Cole sat at the opposite end, both visibly uncomfortable. Cole fidgeted with his hands while Tate sat stiffly, his face pale and his jaw tight. Rhodes stood at the side of the room, looking uneasy as he addressed the group. Everyone, as you know, we're here today because of an incident that occurred yesterday involving Mr. Harris. I want to personally apologize to him and assure him that— Enough, Rhodes, Harris said quietly, cutting him off. Rhodes sat down quickly, his face flushing. Harris looked around the room, his gaze landing on each member of the team. Let's not waste time. What happened yesterday wasn't just an embarrassment for Officer Tate or the security team, it was an embarrassment for this entire mall. The room fell silent. Harris let the weight of his words settle before continuing. When I founded this mall chain years ago, I wanted these spaces to be places of connection. A place where families could enjoy time together, where local businesses could thrive, and where every customer was treated with dignity. But what I saw yesterday tells me we've strayed from that vision. Tate shifted in his seat, opening his mouth to speak, but Harris raised a hand. Not yet, Officer Tate. You'll have your turn. Tate closed his mouth again, his face reddening. Harris continued. It's not about me being the owner. It's about what I witnessed yesterday. Assumptions, disrespect, and a complete failure to follow basic principles of customer care. What if it hadn't been me? What if it was someone who genuinely needed help? An older shopper, a teenager who was lost, or a tenant in need of assistance? Would they have been treated the same way? The management team exchanged uneasy glances, a few heads nodding subtly. Harris turned his gaze to Tate. Officer Tate, do you have something you'd like to say? Tate cleared his throat, his voice uncertain. Sir, I was just doing my job. I didn't know who you were, and you didn't exactly identify yourself. Why should I have to? Harris asked simply, his gaze sharp. Why does someone need to prove their worth to you before you treat them with respect? Tate swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping slightly. I didn't think of it that way. That's the problem, Harris said firmly. You didn't think. You judged. You assumed that because I didn't fit your idea of who belonged here, I didn't deserve to be here. Tate dropped his gaze to the table, shame clear on his face. Harris turned to Cole. Officer Cole, I noticed you hesitated yesterday. You knew something didn't feel right, didn't you? Cole nodded quickly. Yes, sir. I didn't want to go against Tate in front of everyone. He's my partner. Harris's voice softened slightly. Loyalty is important, but so is doing what's right. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is speak up when you know something isn't right, even if it means going against the flow. Cole nodded again, his expression thoughtful. Harris leaned back in his chair, addressing the room as a whole. This isn't about punishing anyone, it's about making sure we do better. I want every single employee in this mall, from security to retail workers to management, to understand one thing: respect isn't optional. It's the foundation of everything we do. Rhodes nodded eagerly, scribbling notes. We'll implement new training programs right away, sir. Customer service, conflict de-escalation, the works? Good, Harris said. I also want mandatory sensitivity training for all staff, starting with the security team. I'll oversee it personally to ensure it's done right. Tate and Cole exchanged glances, both nodding. Yes, sir, Cole said quietly. Harris stood, smoothing the front of his shirt. Remember this, titles and appearances don't matter. Everyone who walks through those doors deserves to feel welcome. If you can't deliver on that promise, then you don't belong here. The room remained silent as Harris walked toward the door, but before stepping out, he turned back to Tate and Cole. One more thing, I'm giving you both another chance. Tate looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. You're not firing us? No, Harris said firmly. Everyone makes mistakes. It's what you do next that matters. Learn from this and do better. Tate nodded quickly, his face filled with relief and gratitude. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. Harris offered a small, faint smile. I'll hold you to that. That afternoon, the mood in the mall felt different. Word of Harris's speech had spread quickly, and the staff seemed more alert, more considerate of the shoppers moving through the space. Security guards greeted customers with polite nods instead of suspicious glances. Store managers held brief huddles with their teams, reiterating the importance of kindness and professionalism. Near the central atrium, Harris stood quietly, watching as a young janitor swept the floor near a set of benches. The janitor looked up, meeting Harris's gaze nervously. Good afternoon, sir, he said, clearly recognizing him. Harris nodded warmly. Good afternoon. What's your name? Carlos, the janitor replied, shifting awkwardly. Harris smiled faintly. Thank you for keeping this place looking its best, Carlos. I appreciate it. Carlos blinked in surprise, his face breaking into a wide grin. Thank you, sir. I mean, it's no problem at all. Harris turned away, his gaze drifting upward to the ceiling light that had been flickering the day before. It was steady now, glowing brightly. A satisfied smile crossed his face as he turned to leave. For Harris, respect wasn't just a policy, it was a promise. And that day the mall became a better place because of it. The mall buzzed with new energy in the days that followed. Word of the incident had spread quickly, not just within Northwest Plaza but across nearby communities and even online. Videos of Harris being escorted out of his own property had gone viral. Clips of the security guards pulling at his arms were accompanied by captions like, "Security kicks out their boss and regrets it. Don't judge a book by its cover. The owner teaches them a lesson they'll never forget." While the incident had caused embarrassment for the mall, it also became a catalyst for change. For the first time in a long time, Harris's vision for Northwest Plaza began to shine through again. 1 week later, in a small meeting room just off the mall's main corridor, Officer Tate and Officer Cole sat side by side at a folding table. Both guards wore clean, pressed uniforms, their posture straight and attentive. Across from them sat Harris, his calm expression making both men fidget uncomfortably. "Do you know why you're here today?" Harris asked, his voice steady. "Yes, sir," Tate said quickly, his face red with shame. "To talk about what happened. And to, apologize." "Good," Harris replied. He looked at both men for a moment before continuing. "Let's talk about that day. What did you learn from it?" Tate hesitated, his confidence clearly shaken. I learned not to assume. I mean, you didn't look like the owner and I thought." "You thought I didn't belong?" Harris finished for him. Tate nodded, dropping his gaze. "Yes, sir." "And why did you think that?" Tate frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Because you weren't wearing a suit or acting like someone in charge. I thought you were just another guy hanging around." Harris leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "And what did that assumption lead you to do?" "I treated you like a problem instead of a person," Tate admitted quietly. Harris nodded, his gaze softening slightly. "That's exactly right. And I don't want you to forget it. You see, Officer Tate, when you make assumptions about people based on appearances, you miss what's really important. That's not just bad for the mall, it's bad for you too." Tate nodded quickly, his voice steady. "I understand now, sir. I really do. I won't make that mistake again." Harris turned to Cole. "And you? What did you learn?" Cole sat up straighter, his voice more confident than his partner's. "I learned that it's okay to speak up. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't say anything. I won't let that happen again." Harris offered a small, approving smile. "Good. Both of you have learned the most important lesson: respect. It doesn't matter who someone is, how they look, or what they're wearing. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Always." "Yes, sir," they both said in unison. Harris stood, smoothing his shirt. "I'm not firing you. But I will be watching. This mall represents my life's work and everyone here, employees and customers, deserve the best. I expect you to uphold that standard." Tate and Cole stood, nodding earnestly. "We won't let you down, sir," Cole said. "See that you don't," Harris replied, a faint smile on his lips. "Now go back out there and do your jobs the right way." As they left the room, Harris exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment lift slightly. Change wasn't always easy, but it started with small steps. That same afternoon, Harris walked the length of the mall with Rhodes trailing beside him, clipboard in hand. The mall felt different, cleaner, livelier, and full of warmth. Store employees greeted customers with smiles, security guards walked their rounds with calm professionalism, and shoppers moved through the bright, welcoming space without hesitation. "I have to say, sir," Rhodes began, flipping through his notes, "the changes you've made have had an immediate impact. Customer satisfaction is already up 20%, and staff morale is improving." Harris nodded, pleased but unsurprised. "Good. Respect isn't just about appearances, it's about how we treat each other at every level. People notice when you care." As they walked, Harris stopped by a janitor mopping near the food court. "Carlos," Harris said warmly. Carlos looked up, surprised but happy to see him. "Mr. Harris. Good afternoon. How's it going today?" Harris asked, genuinely interested. Really good, sir, Carlos replied. I've been hearing from the other guys too. People seem happier, you know? Like we're all working together. Harris smiled, patting Carlos on the shoulder. That's what I like to hear. Keep up the good work. Carlos grinned as Harris walked away, feeling a swell of pride. Rhodes turned to Harris as they continued down the corridor. Sir, I still can't believe how well you handled that situation. Most people would have fired Tate and Cole on the spot. Harris shook his head. Firing them wouldn't have solved anything. They needed to learn, not just be punished. Sometimes people need a chance to do better. Rhodes nodded thoughtfully, scribbling something on his clipboard. Well, whatever you're doing, it's working. People have been talking about how much the mall has improved since last week. It's like you gave this place a second life. Harris smiled faintly as he looked around. Sometimes you have to remind people what really matters. Later that evening, as the mall quieted down and stores began to close, Harris stood at the second-floor balcony, gazing out over the atrium. The soft glow of the lights reflected off the polished marble floors, and the distant hum of conversation drifted up to meet him. A group of teenagers laughed as they passed below, arms full of shopping bags. A mother sat near a bench, tying her child's shoes while the toddler giggled. A store manager shook hands with a satisfied customer, their smiles genuine. Harris let the sight sink in, pride swelling in his chest. This was what he had always envisioned, a place where people could come together, feel welcomed, and enjoy themselves. Rhodes approached quietly, standing beside him. It's beautiful, isn't it? Harris nodded slowly. It is. But it didn't get this way by accident. It took work, and it'll take more work to keep it this way. Rhodes smiled faintly. I don't think you'll have to worry about that. Everyone knows what's expected of them now. Good, Harris replied. He took one last look at the bustling mall below before turning away. Let's keep it that way. 1 month later. The incident had faded from the headlines, but its impact remained. Northwest Plaza Mall was thriving again, with record-high customer traffic and store revenues. Security teams greeted shoppers warmly, employees treated one another with respect, and shoppers felt a renewed sense of community. At the food court, Officer Tate and Officer Cole stood near a group of kids who were arguing over a spilled soda. Tate knelt down, his voice calm but kind. Hey, no big deal. Let's get this cleaned up, okay? Accidents happen. Cole handed the kids some napkins and gave them a reassuring smile. Don't worry about it. Just be careful next time, all right? The kids nodded, smiling sheepishly. As they ran off, Cole glanced at Tate, grinning. We're getting better at this, huh? Tate chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, Harris was right. Respect makes all the difference. Near the atrium, Harris stood quietly, watching as families and friends moved through the space. The ceiling lights were fixed, the kiosks neatly arranged, and the energy was exactly as he'd hoped. A small, satisfied smile crossed his face as he turned and began walking toward the exit. As he passed through the automatic doors, a man paused and nodded respectfully. Have a good day, sir. Harris smiled warmly. You too. And as he stepped into the evening light, he knew that his work was far from over. But for now, the mall was exactly as it should be, a place where everyone belonged. The soft glow of sunset filtered through the tall glass windows of Northwest Plaza Mall, bathing the space in a golden hue. Harris stood at the balcony once again, leaning on the railing as he observed the busy atrium below. It was quieter now, families packing up after a day of shopping, store employees closing down their registers, and maintenance crews sweeping through the halls. From up here, everything felt connected, seamless. But Harris knew better than anyone that such harmony required effort, care, and attention to detail. As he stood there, his thoughts drifted back to the events of the past few weeks. Tate's mistake, Cole's hesitation, and the lessons learned. It was an uncomfortable chapter, but one he wouldn't erase. Growth required mistakes. It was what you did afterward that mattered. Long day, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Harris turned to see Rhodes approaching, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. Harris accepted one with a small nod of thanks. Long but rewarding, Harris said, his voice calm. It's been a while since this place felt like this. Rhodes took a sip of his coffee, glancing around. People are talking, you know. Customers, employees, even tenants. They say the mall feels different, better. Harris raised an eyebrow, taking a sip from his cup. Good. That's what we want. I've even heard a couple of store managers say they're bringing in more foot traffic now. Customers feel comfortable staying longer, Rhodes continued, his tone almost excited. It's funny, sir. This whole thing started with a misunderstanding, but it turned into something that's changed the mall for the better. Harris smiled faintly. Sometimes it takes a wake-up call. You'd be surprised how many leaders let small cracks turn into craters. That's not going to happen here. Rhodes nodded in agreement, his expression thoughtful. Speaking of changes, I wanted to ask about the security team. I noticed you've had Cole and Tate helping with some of the tenant issues this week. Checking in on them, assisting customers? They're earning back their trust, Harris replied. They made mistakes, but I don't believe in throwing people away. I gave them a chance, and so far they're proving me right. Rhodes smiled. They've definitely improved. Tate even smiled at a shopper yesterday. I thought I was seeing things. Harris chuckled softly. People rise to the expectations you set for them. Treat them like problems and that's what they become. Treat them like people with potential and they'll surprise you. Rhodes nodded, visibly impressed. You know, sir, you could have handled this 100 different ways. Most owners wouldn't have shown up in the first place, let alone handled things personally. That's the difference between being an owner and being a leader, Harris replied. When you care about something, you show up for it. The next morning, Harris arrived at the mall early. The air still felt cool as sunlight spilled through the large front windows. Shoppers hadn't yet arrived, and the halls were quiet save for the sound of cleaning crews preparing the space. Harris took his usual walk through the building, observing everything as he always did, checking for small repairs, greeting early workers, and taking note of anything out of place. Near the food court, he saw Officer Cole helping an elderly woman carry her bags. She smiled brightly as he walked beside her, thanking him for his help. Harris stopped for a moment, watching the exchange with quiet pride. Further down the hall, he noticed Tate standing by a kiosk, speaking to a store owner who seemed frustrated. Instead of brushing her off, Tate nodded attentively, jotting down notes as she explained the issue. Tate's posture was calmer now, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. Harris approached as the store owner finished speaking. "Thank you, Officer Tate," she said, her voice genuinely appreciative. "I really hope this gets resolved." "It will," Tate assured her. "I'll follow up on this by the end of the day." The store owner walked away looking relieved. Tate turned and froze slightly when he saw Harris standing nearby. "Morning, sir," he said quickly, straightening his shoulders. "Morning, Tate," Harris said with a small nod. "Good work back there." Tate blinked, surprised. "Thank you, sir. I'm just doing what I should have been doing all along." Harris smiled faintly. "That's all I ask. Keep it up." As Harris continued his walk, Tate exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. He glanced back at the store owner, then adjusted his cap, feeling a quiet sense of pride. By mid-afternoon, the mall was alive with energy again. Harris sat in his private office on the second floor, looking over reports from Rhodes. Customer complaints had dropped significantly, and tenant satisfaction scores were at their highest in months. Security logs showed fewer incidents of conflict, and more employees had taken the initiative to help customers without prompting. Harris leaned back in his chair, feeling a rare sense of accomplishment. The incident with Tate and Cole had been messy, but it had opened the door to something better. A team that worked together with mutual respect. As he sat there, his phone buzzed on the desk. Harris glanced at the screen and smiled faintly when he saw the caller ID. He picked up the phone, his voice warm. "Hi, Rebecca." "Dad?" His daughter's voice came through, cheerful and bright. "How's the mall today?" Harris chuckled softly. "Better than ever. Things are finally starting to fall into place." "That's great," she replied. "I saw the video, by the way. You're famous now." Harris groaned playfully. "Don't remind me." "No, seriously, it's all over the internet. Everyone's saying you're a hero for standing up for yourself and teaching those guards a lesson." "I wasn't trying to be a hero," Harris said simply. "I was just trying to do the right thing." "And you did," Rebecca said firmly. "I'm proud of you, Dad. You always say that respect is earned and you've proved it. Everyone who works at that mall is lucky to have you." Harris smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "Thanks, sweetheart. That means a lot. Just promise me you won't get kicked out of any more malls," she teased. Harris laughed, shaking his head. "I'll try my best." Later that afternoon, Harris made one final stop in the mall. His favorite coffee shop near the north wing. The barista, a young man named Jordan, smiled when he saw Harris approach. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harris," Jordan said brightly. "Your usual?" "Yes, please," Harris replied, pulling out his wallet. Jordan hesitated, his expression turning serious for a moment. "Hey, sir? I just wanted to say, what you did last week really inspired a lot of us. It's nice knowing someone like you cares about this place." Harris paused, surprised by the sincerity in Jordan's voice. "Thank you, Jordan. That means a lot." Jordan handed him his coffee, grinning. On the house, sir. It's the least I can do. Harris smiled warmly, taking the cup. I appreciate it. But remember, treat everyone with the same respect, whether their name is stitched on a shirt or not. Always, Jordan said with a nod. As the day drew to a close, Harris walked through the mall one last time. He watched as a family laughed over ice cream, a store manager high-fived an employee, and Officer Cole greeted a group of teenagers warmly, pointing them in the right direction. The mall was alive again, not just with customers but with something more important, a sense of community. Harris stopped near the entrance, taking one final look around. The flickering lights were fixed. The kiosks were full. The staff worked together. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like the mall was exactly where it was meant to be. As Harris stepped outside, he took a deep breath of the evening air. The world was always changing, he thought. But respect, kindness, and leadership were timeless. And as long as he was here, Northwest Plaza would never forget that. Days turned into weeks, and the changes at Northwest Plaza Mall became impossible to ignore. What had once been just another commercial hub was now a shining example of what a place could become when people were treated with respect. Customers no longer felt rushed or ignored. Staff greeted them warmly, ready to assist with genuine smiles. Even the security team, once seen as unapproachable, had become a familiar, friendly presence. Harris's quiet vision had come to life. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Harris returned to the mall, walking through the sliding glass doors with his usual calm stride. But today felt different, lighter, warmer. The energy was unmistakable. A small band played near the center atrium, cheerful music carrying through the halls. Storefronts gleamed, decorated with bright signage advertising special weekend sales. Families walked together, kids laughing as they clutched balloon animals handed out by a roaming performer. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," someone called from a nearby coffee stand. Harris turned, smiling warmly at Jordan, the barista who had served him before. "Good morning, Jordan. You're bright and early today." Jordan grinned as he handed a steaming cup of coffee to a customer. "Always, sir. Busy day ahead. Thanks to you, we've got record foot traffic for the weekend. It's nice to see so many happy faces." Harris gave him a nod of approval. "Keep up the good work." Harris's next stop was the security office. The hum of camera monitors filled the room as Officer Cole greeted him with a smile. "Morning, sir," Cole said, standing up straighter as Harris entered. "Everything's running smoothly today. No incidents to report." Harris raised an eyebrow playfully. "None at all? You're making my job too easy." Cole chuckled, relaxing. "We've been keeping on top of things, sir. Tate's already out on patrol, checking in with store managers and shoppers. He's a completely different person these days." Harris leaned against the desk, his expression thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear that. Sometimes all it takes is a second chance, and someone believing in you." Cole nodded, his voice sincere. "You taught us that, sir. I won't forget it." Before Harris could respond, the office door swung open, and Officer Tate walked in holding a small notebook. He paused when he saw Harris, but this time there was no awkwardness, just respect. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," Tate said with a faint smile. "I just finished my morning rounds. Everything looks good out there." Harris straightened, offering him a nod of approval. "Good work, Tate. How are you finding things these days?" Tate hesitated for a moment before answering. "Different. Better." He cleared his throat, his tone earnest. "I've learned a lot these past few weeks, about judgment, about respect. I used to think this was just a job, but now I see it differently. It's about the people. All of them." Harris smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth lifting. "That's exactly right. Keep it up." As Harris turned to leave, Tate spoke again, his voice softer. "Mr. Harris?" "Yes. Thank you. For not giving up on me." Harris paused, his gaze steady. "Don't thank me, Tate. Thank yourself for being willing to change. That's what matters most." Tate nodded firmly, a quiet resolve in his eyes. By mid-afternoon, Harris made his way toward the atrium, where a small community event was underway. Tables were set up with vendors selling handmade crafts, baked goods, and art from local artists. Shoppers mingled, children ran excitedly through the crowd, and the band continued to play cheerful tunes. At one of the tables sat Carlos, the young janitor Harris had spoken to earlier. This time he wasn't holding a mop, he was proudly displaying a collection of hand-carved wooden figures, each one a unique and intricate piece. Harris approached, smiling as he picked up one of the carvings. "These are beautiful, Carlos," Harris said, studying a small wooden eagle with outstretched wings. Carlos's face lit up. "Thank you, sir. I've been carving in my free time for years, but this is the first time I've shown them to anyone. What made you decide to display them today? Harris asked curiously. Carlos glanced around at the bustling atrium, his expression warm. You did, sir. After what happened a few weeks ago, everything just changed. People are kinder now, more willing to listen. When the mall announced this community event, I figured, why not? I feel like I belong here. Harris set the wooden eagle down carefully, his chest swelling with quiet pride. I'm glad to hear that, Carlos. This mall is as much yours as it is anyone else's. Keep sharing your talent with the world. Carlos beamed. Thank you, Mr. Harris. That means a lot. Harris nodded, turning to walk through the crowd, his heart full. This was what he had envisioned all along, a place where people could feel welcome, appreciated, and connected. At the far end of the atrium, Rhodes stood with a clipboard, checking off details for the event. He turned as Harris approached, looking visibly pleased. Sir, this is the best turnout we've had in years. I've already had 3 store managers tell me their sales are through the roof today. Good, Harris replied simply, scanning the scene with satisfaction. People come to places where they feel valued. If you respect them, they'll keep coming back. Rhodes grinned. You've proven that, sir. As they spoke, a familiar face appeared from the crowd. Rebecca, Harris's daughter, carrying a coffee in one hand and a shopping bag in the other. Dad? She called, making her way over. Harris smiled warmly as she approached. I wasn't expecting to see you today. Rebecca grinned, looking around the busy mall. I had to come see it for myself. This place feels amazing. It's like a whole new mall. That's because of the people, Harris said, gesturing around them. Everyone here, customers, staff, managers, they're what make this place work. Rebecca smiled proudly. You always say that, but it's different seeing it in action. You turned a bad situation into something incredible. Harris chuckled softly. Sometimes all it takes is a little perspective. Rebecca nudged him playfully. And a lot of stubbornness. You never give up on anyone, do you? Harris smiled faintly, his eyes thoughtful as he looked out over the bustling crowd. No. Because when you give people a chance to be better, they usually rise to the occasion. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the polished mall floors, Harris made his way toward the exit. The day had been a success, another step toward rebuilding the trust, respect, and community that had made Northwest Plaza Mall special in the first place. Near the front doors, he paused for a moment, taking one last look at the mall. A young family entered, laughing as the kids pointed excitedly at the balloons and decorations. 2 security guards, Tate and Cole, greeted them warmly, offering directions with genuine smiles. Harris smiled to himself. It wasn't about flashy renovations or gimmicks. It wasn't about appearances or assumptions. It was about the simple, timeless values that brought people together: respect, kindness, and the willingness to do better. And as he stepped out into the cool evening air, Harris knew that this wasn't the end of his work. It was just the beginning of something greater. Because at Northwest Plaza Mall, everyone belonged.